Welcome to Ouch. Was that a ghost? This podcast may contain graphic material, which some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised.
Help me.
Now that we covered that, here's your host, Liz.
Welcome back to Ouch, Was That a Ghost? This week I'm covering HH Holmes, America's first serial killer, or first known serial killer. He operated between 1891 and 1894. The full extent of his depravity will never be known. He was probably most well known for his murder hotel in Chicago at the time of the World's Fair. Operating the same time as Jack the Ripper, some, including his great-grandson, have theorized that they may in fact be one and the same. It's really hard, or I guess impossible, to get the full truth about this guy. Throughout his life, he was not a very forthcoming individual. He was forever engaging in schemes, fraud, and I think it's said he had up to 50 aliases he would use, on top of all the murders. He confessed to 27, only for authorities to find out that some of those that he confessed to killing were still alive. Like, why lie about that? It's speculated he may have killed over 200 people. I'm not sure if he murdered or scammed more in his lifetime. This was probably the hardest case to try to track down the truth, to try to weed through all the nonsense that he spewed. He was born Herman Webster Mudgett on May 16, 1861, in the small town of Gilmanton, New Hampshire, to parents Levi Mudgett, who was a farmer, a trader, and a painter, and Theodate Price was his mother, and she was a homemaker. They were a well-respected family in the community. Herman was the couple's third child. The family were devout, strict Methodists. Herman's mother was described as strict, and his father as cold and firm. He had an average childhood. His parents did demand obedience, but that's just how it went. Although some claim he was abused as a child, there's no proof of it, and I think that that's just how people want to paint it after the fact to give a reason for why he was how he was. But like I said, it's really hard to get the truth, as Herman lies his whole life. And with yellow journalism playing a big part, yellow journalism is media dramatizing or sensationalizing headlines to sell more. But with this, I think history gives him more credit than he deserves. Don't get me wrong, he sucks. But with the press being able to print whatever they want with no consequences, of course they're going to make the headlines larger than they are, just so they can sell more papers. As a child, Herman was described as polite, intelligent. He was known not to make eye contact, but I mean, maybe this was just with adults. Maybe it was a respect thing. Maybe it was anxiety or nerves. I don't know. But he went on to prep school, and by all accounts, he was a real charming boy and exceptionally bright. He did get bullied a lot. Some theorize because he was so bright that other kids were jealous of this. They saw how easy school came to him. But there was one incident in particular of bullying that seemed to have the biggest impact on his life. A few of the older kids learned that Herman was petrified of the doctors. So when Herman was about 13, a group of kids forcibly brought him to the town's doctors one day and forced Herman to stand face to face with a human skeleton. Herman's biggest fear come true. And the kids even put the skeleton's hands on Herman's face. And at the time, these weren't plastic skeletons. These were human skeletons that were articulated and hung up and standing. Herman later speaks of this incident, and he said he was petrified at first, but then he found this experience intriguing, and it actually allowed him to overcome his fear. And it turned into a morbid curiosity. Some of the residents in town said that he started torturing animals, which is never a good sign. There were also stories of young family members and a best friend of his that all died under mysterious circumstances whilst he was growing up. And according to the American Ripper docuseries on the History Channel, which I did use for a lot of this, the town saw a disproportionately high number of mysterious deaths while Herman was growing up in the town records. He would later go into the medical field to continue the subject that now fascinated him. Maybe because of the skeleton incident, or maybe it would have happened anyways. Herman graduated with honors at 16, and he tried his hand at a teaching job. That didn't go too well. He ended up meeting Clara Lovering, who came from a wealthy farming family, and he began courting her. and then he married her on July 4th, 1878, when they were both 17. The couple would go on to have one son, Robert Lovering Mudgett. He started studying under Dr. White, the doctor where he got the skeleton on his face, and he studied away in all of his free time. At 18, in 1879, Herman enrolled in the University of Vermont, and he basically moved there, and he was staying in a boarding house while going to college. There was a story that while he was staying in that house, a roommate used Herman's mustache cream without asking. So Herman erupted and started pounding on the guy. This usually prim and proper guy just losing it over a simple toiletry. That's all it takes, I guess. Clara was with her parents, and Herman is just flirting and wooing women like he's single and studying while Clara pays his way. The thing about Herman is he has like this sort of fake it till you make it way about him. He was described as well-dressed, intelligent, charming, and he was studying to be a doctor, so I guess a combination of all these, he managed to get a lot of women. This was the late 1800s, a time when medical students needed cadavers, and they pretty much had to find their own. It was socially frowned upon, but it was kind of a necessity if you wanted to take the courses. And as you'll see, Herman was more comfortable working with cadavers than he probably should have been. One story goes that around this time, while still in medical school, his Burlington landlady was just cleaning and she smelt a terrible odor coming from Herman's room. She went to go find the smell and she found a deceased infant under his bed. Herman said, "Oh, that's just homework." She had no questions like, "Hey, where did you get that infant?" She was just like, "Don't bring it home anymore." Herman left the University of Vermont the next year, which some say it was too boring for him. Either way, he left after a year. The next year, he transferred to the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery. Like the other school, he got a room at a boarding house, but this time Clara came to stay with him, who, if you remember, he's just flirting away, dissecting babies in his room, and Clara was just paying his bills and raising their son. Clara, who was described as a loving wife, she was just a sweet person who was trying to be close to her husband. And while Clara was walking around the campus, others at the college gave accounts of Clara having bruises on her face, I'm assuming inflicted by Herman. Clara did go back home to New Hampshire before he graduated. She left his ass, thankfully. At the college, Herman got an assistant's job in the anatomy lab alongside the chief anatomy instructor, Professor William Jones Hardman, for whom Herman would acquire cadavers. Herman was definitely more comfortable working with cadavers than his classmates. But remember, now Clara left him, so he doesn't have her money to rely on anymore. So he needed to make money. So he devised a plan. Herman would open life insurance policies for people he made up that he was related to. He would acquire cadavers, inflict enough injuries on the cadaver so the cadaver couldn't be recognized, and he would contact the life insurance company and collect the policy on the accidental deaths of relatives. He also had a scheme to steal bodies from graves and morgues, articulate them, and sell them to colleges as skeletons. According to his own memoir, Holmes said that he stole from the lab and cemetery and turned in the bodies as new deaths. While at the school, he got all the chemistry and anatomy knowledge he needed. He was cutting into bodies pretty much daily. I guess that's a foreshadow? While Herman was running his schemes at school, he was staying at a boarding house, and he even promised to marry a woman, which he never had plans to do, which was a pretty big deal back then. And he almost didn't get his medical license because of this. And he had his teacher, the anatomy instructor, speak up for him and say, "Oh no, Herman would never do that," but he managed to wiggle his way out of it. But he graduated medical school, and having such good luck with the insurance scams, he kept at it. He made a big one that made over $10,000. I think it was $12,000. And then he decided to take off for a bit, maybe feeling the heat on him. So he went to Moore's Forks, New York, just ignoring the fact that he had a wife and a child. And there he tried to teach again. And he worked as a doctor, opening his own little practice, where he ran a scam. He would go around town saying that he was a government official, selling vaccines, and he made some money off of it. He tried to get this patented, but it never happened. While in New York, he's still being a pig with women. And again, he started having debts piling up. He was behind on rent, and he was seen with a little boy that just vanished, and rumors were swirling. Holmes was like, "Who, him? Oh, he just went home to his house in Massachusetts." And with the heat on Herman, he just left before paying his debts or an official investigation of the missing boy could take place, which, okay. So Herman went to Pennsylvania, where he got a job at a state hospital as an asylum attendant and quit a few days later. Then he got a job at a pharmacy. Shortly after starting his new job, a young boy bought some medicine at the store from Holmes, and then the boy just died. And Herman was like, oh, me? I had no part in this. It just left. Because remember, they don't investigate if the suspect just leaves. Herman was getting a lot of things on credit. He owed rent, which of course he had no intention of paying back. So in the middle of the night, he up and left Chicago bound. This is when he decided to no longer go by Herman and to go by Henry Howard Holmes, or HH Holmes. They know this because the name he used on his pharmaceutical or pharmacy exam, but it's said to avoid his previous debts, but I think he was just sick of being Herman Mudgett. So now, 1885, the 25-year-old, freshly rebranded, if you will, HH Holmes makes his way to Chicago. The city is booming with job opportunities. And this was not too long after the Chicago fire of 1871 that destroyed so much of the city. So the city was still full of workers, people, investors, just trying to rebuild. There were so many job opportunities. Holmes in the new city needed a job, so he went to a drugstore called E.S. Holton Drugs in the Englewood section of Chicago, which is not far from where the World's Fair would be held. And as you'll see, this guy is charming. He seems to be able to convince people, charm, scam through his whole life. Well, he spoke to the store owner, Miss Elizabeth Holton, and convinced her to hire him, which probably wasn't that hard because her husband, Mr. Holton, was ill, and she was happy to have someone running the store so she could tend to her husband. And he fit right in with the community. Customers loved Holmes. They found him charming. When Mr. Everett Holton ended up dying from natural causes, Holmes was like, I'll buy your store and you can live upstairs if you want. You know, when they worked something out, like on credit, pay or make payments to her. And he rebranded the store. And then strangely, Miss Elizabeth Holton disappeared. He told people that she went out of town for family or something like that. So that's strange. But now Holmes owns the store outright. Holmes then meets and marries 24-year-old Myrta Belknap. They got a place in Wilmette, Illinois. But Holmes would spend the majority of his time in Chicago, while his new wife spent her time in Illinois. By the way, he's still married to Clara. And at a point, it said he did file for divorce from Clara, claiming that she was unfaithful. Sir, you left your family, but sure. But there's no proof of Clara ever being unfaithful or that she was even notified that he filed for divorce. Either way, Holmes and Clara would remain legally married until his death. But in his eyes, he was married to his new wife, Myrta, whose family was also wealthy. Holmes and his new wife would go on to have one daughter, Lucy Theodate Holmes. And Holmes was off running the store and, of course, scamming, buying his products on credit under aliases and selling the products and keeping all the profit, never planning on paying the creditors back. On top of the money he got from his second wife's family and, of course, his inventions. He sold some mineral elixir water. But remember, it's Holmes, so it was just water in a bottle. Across the street from the pharmacy that he now owned, there was a vacant lot at 63rd and Wallace. So he bought it with the money he schemed, got on credit, conned out of people. So now, 1888, this is 4 years before the fair, planning and construction was underway for what would become a 2-story and later would become a 3-story building of horror. Holmes hired architects, but he himself made the final plans. And it was done to save money and to keep the actual plans for the building to himself. He would hire workers and fire them before they did too much. So they only knew bits and pieces of the layout, and he could avoid paying them. Somebody would come in and work for a day, and then he'd be like, oh, you did a terrible job. So he would get all this free labor. One article said that, quote, police would determine that he never paid a cent for any material that went into the building, getting everything on credit, which he never planned on paying back. He pretty regularly had lawsuits thrown at him, but he also did a lot of deed transfers, like he would transfer to his mother-in-law's name or this. So if a creditor came after him, he would say, oh, this building, it's not under my name, it's under my mother-in-law's name. And in that documentary I mentioned at the beginning, if you go on there, they started pulling all of his deed transfers he did. He had so many, like they could not keep up with them. But his charm must have been pretty powerful. He avoided jail. The second floor of the building had 35 rooms, and it was almost a labyrinth-like layout. It was weird. It had odd angles. It had doors that opened to nothing, staircases that went nowhere. and other accessories that he added, such as a chute that would go from a windowless room straight to the basement. He had rooms that were completely sealed or filled with too many doors. Some of the doors which would open to brick walls. They had false panels, doors that locked from the outside, all that stuff. Oh, and it said he got this huge vault and put it in a room on the second floor, and he had the construction crew build around the vault so it couldn't be moved. Then when it was time for him to pay for it, and, the bank wanted their money or the vault, he was like, okay, come take it, but if anything gets damaged, you're responsible. They probably didn't want the hassle. They were like, yeah, whatever. So back to his extra amenities. He had a gas chamber. It was basically gas jets that he put in rooms. And he had the control panel in his bedroom closet, allowing him to release gas into these rooms that would allow him to asphyxiate his guests. It's also said that some rooms had blowtorches, and he had alarms set on the room doors, so he would know if people would leave or not. But take this as you will, because history has sensationalized a lot about him in print, and they do have diagrams of this, but I don't know. And of course, he had some hidden rooms where he could put things where he bought on credit and he didn't even plan to pay for. And when creditors would try to sue him for costs on the building, he would do a quick deed change. So now it's in someone else's name or buy it under another alias. He just had so many schemes running. The first floor of his building had stores. It had the pharmacy that was across the street that he moved to his building. It had a blacksmith shop, a restaurant, a jewelry store, and a barbershop. And then he had the basement where the chute led. It was like a mad scientist lab. It was basically a torture chamber. He had pits with quick lye. He had a dissection table. He had tools, a kiln that could reach such high temperatures it was basically a crematorium. And he had vats of acid. With all this stuff in the basement, he could keep murdering if he wanted to and articulate skeletons and sell them to local medical schools. He would later on, I think in 1892, add a third floor. Claimed he was planning to rent it out during the World's Columbian Exposition or the World's Fair. So back to 1889, he's still building away, hiring and firing to not pay. Holmes met Benjamin Pitezel. When Benjamin answered an ad for Holmes, you know how he needs workers. Pitezel didn't mind working, but he couldn't seem to keep a job. He was known to drink too much, and he did have a criminal history, but nothing major, like forgery, larceny, I'm assuming to provide for his wife Carrie and their 5 children. He had Desi, Alice, Nellie, Howard, and the youngest being Wharton, an infant. Holmes and Pitezel hit it off. Pitezel started doing jobs for Holmes, becoming his right-hand man. Holmes met Pitezel's family. They were buds. At the jewelry store on the first floor, Holmes hired Ned Connor, who came to work for Holmes and brought his wife along, Julia, and Holmes and Julia started an affair. When Ned found out about this, he left Julia and their daughter Pearl, so Julia just stayed at the hotel with Holmes. Holmes hired her as a bookkeeper and started taking out loans and real estate holdings in her name. The hotel now being advertised for jobs or a place to stay in anticipation for the World Fair. The hotel started being called the Castle just because of its massiveness of people walking by it. The Castle now advertised for jobs or a place to stay in anticipation of the World's Fair and the crowd of out-of-towners that would come with it. The thing is that some guests that would come to stay would never be seen again. And a lot of these people were out-of-towners or traveling alone. And Holmes was just carrying on with Julia, which was all fine and dandy until Julia said to Holmes, hey, I'm pregnant. This is where I'm going to cut it for part 2. I'm going to release it today too, so you guys don't have to wait. It'll be right out. It's going to be released at the same time, so you can just continue on to part 2. All right, well, thank you everybody for listening. Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you need more content or just want to help support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com and search Ouch, Was That a Ghost? If you need some snazzy merch, you can find it at crowdmade.com by searching Ouch, Was That a Ghost? If you have a story you'd like to share, you can email it to ouchwasthataghost@yahoo.com. You can also find us on Facebook and all the other social media platforms under Ouch, Was That a Ghost?
Help me.
All links can also be found on ouchwasthataghost.com.